بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
صلى الله وسلم على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اهتدى بهداه أما بعد. In the book of wudu, we got to the hadith of Talq ibn Ali رضي الله عنه. قال رجل مسست ذكري أو قال الرجل يمس ذكره في الصلاة عليه وضوء. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا إنما هو بضعة منك. This is the first hadith that we have on this topic, the hadith of Talq رضي الله عنه. He says a man touches his private parts. A man touches his private parts during the salah. During salah, must he perform wudu? So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "La, no. It's only part of your body." Okay. Why in the salah? Because clothing then was different to clothing that we have now. So it was possible for someone to make physical contact with the private parts. Or the other explanation is that he means touching the private parts over a layer of clothing. Because in the salah, a person is going to be covered. Even if clothing is little, you're still going to be covered. And so the second explanation is that he touches his private parts over a cover. Over a cover. After that we have the hadith of Busra bin Safwan radiallahu anha. أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من مس ذكره فليتوضأ. Both hadith are authentic. Whoever touches his private parts, then he must make wudu. This is the command of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. For the first hadith, is considered da'if by Ad-Daraqutni and Al-Bayhaqi. And on the other hand, Ibn al-Madini, Ali ibn al-Madini, from the big imams of Ahlul Hadith, from the scholars of Hadith, says, هو أحسن من حديث بصرة. It's better than the second hadith. And on the second hadith, the hadith of Busra, in which the Prophet ﷺ says, whoever touches his private parts make wudu, Al-Bukhari says, هو أصح شيء في الباب. It's the most authentic hadith in this chapter. The majority of scholars took the opinion that touching the private parts with the hand invalidates the wudu. If a person touches the private parts with the hand, they must repeat their wudu. And this is the opinion of Malik ibn Anas. And the opinion of Al-Imam Shafi'i. What's the Shafi'i's name? His full name? Muhammad ibn Idris. Al-Imam Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i. And the third is the opinion of Ahmad ibn Hanbal also, that touching the private parts requires wudu. And we said Hanbal is his father or grandfather? Grandfather. What's his father's name? Muhammad. Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Hanbal. These three imams are of the opinion that touching the private parts invalidates wudu. Touching without a layer. Okay, what about the first hadith? The Prophet ﷺ says, it's only part of your body. It's only a part of your body. They understood it in two ways. Either the first hadith, he touches it with a covering while it's covered. They said it touches it while it's covered. Other scholars say, no, because he said it's only part of your body. He said it's only part of your body. If it's touching clothing, then it's not body, it's clothing. Okay? And this is the opinion of Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. The Hanafi scholars are of this opinion. Why did the Hanafi scholars reject the second hadith of Busra? Because they have a principle in their usul of the madhab of Abu Hanifa that the narration of one person, or this is from what I understood from some of the scholars, the narration of one person in a matter which they call ma ta'ummu bihi al-balwa, is not enough. So now we have an issue which is so commonly occurring amongst people. It occurs commonly amongst people. Touching the private parts, is this something that happens rarely or something that happens all the time that people need to know about? Huh?
Rare.
Is it rare?
Rare.
It happens all the time. People make ghusl, people get changed, change their clothing, people have showers. Okay? They need to know the ruling on touching the private parts. If it invalidates the wudu, they need to know it invalidates. So the scholars of the Hanafi madhab, rahimahullah, say, how can a ruling like this, which is so important and so commonly occurring, we only have one hadith narrated in it. And it's not in Sahih, it's Hasan. One hadith only. And not just that, it's a woman who narrated it, Busra, radiallahu anha. So they say, how can we have this big ruling and only one woman narrates the hadith? And based on this they say, we won't have that. Plus on top of that, we have the hadith of talq, in which the Prophet ﷺ says it's only part of your body. So because of that they say, touching the private parts doesn't invalidate wudu. And the majority of scholars say this is not necessarily the case. A person might initially have been narrated to one person, and it then spreads. Okay, then spreads to other people. Yeah, spreads to other people. And there are other narrations also, narrated from other companions. Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu made ghusl. And after making ghusl, he made wudu. After making ghusl, he made wudu. So his son, Salim ibn Abdullah, rahimahullah, who was from al-Fuqaha al-Sab'ah. They're known as al-Fuqaha al-Sab'ah, the 7 Fuqaha of Medina. They were the foundations of the Sunnah and foundations of Hadith, these scholars of Medina. They were children of companions or children of tabi'een, or they themselves were tabi'een, in fact. So Salim says to him, you made ghusl already, why did you make wudu as well? Why did you also make wudu? He said, yes, isn't ghusl enough? He said, yes, ghusl is enough. However, sometimes I touch my private parts after making ghusl, so I repeat wudu. So Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anh clearly knows that touching the private parts invalidates the wudu. Yeah? And so it's not a case of just narrated by one woman only. The companions had this ruling, they knew it. Some scholars, and this is the choice of, from the contemporary scholars of Shaykh Muhammad ibn Salih ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, they try to combine between these two ahadith which seemingly contradict by saying the first hadith is if you touch your private parts without desire. The second hadith is if you touch your private parts with desire. And this is quite a strong way of combining, because in the first hadith the Prophet ﷺ says it's only part of your body. It's only part of your body. The private parts is different to the rest of the body in what way? In that shahwa is involved. Desire is involved in it. Desire is not involved touching the ear, touching the head, touching the arm, touching the hair. So the private part is different to the rest of the body when it comes to desire. But without desire, it's exactly the same. Without desire, it's exactly the same. So because the Prophet ﷺ says it's only part of your body, that showed that if you touch it without desire, then it's like the rest of your body, skin. It's just skin that you're touching. But if it's with desire, then there's a slight difference. It's not like the rest of your body. In summary, therefore, we have 3 main opinions. Okay, 3 main opinions on this issue. The first is the opinion of the majority, who say touching the private parts, regardless of whether with desire or without desire, your wudu is invalid. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man massa dhakarahu falyatawadda." If you touch your private parts, whoever touches their private parts must make wudu. He didn't say desire, he didn't say no desire, he didn't say left or right. He said whoever touches their private parts must make wudu. As for the first hadith, it's only part of your body. Then we said some scholars of Ahl al-Hadith consider it da'if, not authentic. Like al-Daraqutni and al-Bayhaqi. And they're big imams of hadith. The second opinion is an opinion that says it doesn't invalidate at all, with desire or without desire. And this is the opinion of who? Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, and also other scholars who followed him, like Sufyan al-Thawri. And the third opinion is the opinion of one narration in the madhab of Malik, and the choice of Shaikh ibn Uthaymeen, and the choice of some other scholars. And that is that it invalidates if you touch with desire, and doesn't invalidate without desire. And of course, the safest view and the safest opinion, following from the action of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, who had the opinion that touching the private parts invalidates wudu, whether with or without shahwa. This first opinion is safer. And the ahadith in it are stronger, as al-Bukhari rahimahullah says. Muhammad ibn Ismail Bukhari is the imam of the muhaddithin, and he says this hadith is stronger. Touching the private parts invalidates the wudu. Okay. But like we said, this opinion is the opinion of the majority or minority? Majority. The majority of scholars say touching the private parts invalidates wudu. And there are extra details which are still important. So we'll mention them anyway, even though it might get confusing. Malik and Shafi'i say touching the private parts invalidates if it's with this part of the hand only. The inner part, not this part. They say because touching with this part is when it's properly called touching, when you actually touch. Whereas if you were to brush it accidentally, your arm moves and brushes it with the outside, that's similar to accidentally touching with the elbow or touching like that. There's no thought behind it, and there's no intention behind it usually. Whereas touching with the inner part, that's properly called touching. Okay. Anyways, like we said, there are several opinions, and this opinion is the majority opinion. Is safer also. It's safer also to stick to this opinion. Let me just see here where. Okay. Like we said, that's the safer opinion and better choice to make wudu whenever a person touches their private parts. This touching of the private parts is specific to the private parts only. It doesn't include the testicles, even though that's graphic and so on. It doesn't include the testicles, anything that's next to the privates or behind and so on. It's not included because it doesn't come under the hadith of Busra radiallahu anhu. Okay, touching the private parts only invalidates the wudu, and that's it. Okay. Is that clear on this topic? Touching the private parts. Of course, touching the private parts here over a layer, behind a layer, meaning not on top. If you're wearing shorts, or you're wearing a thobe, or you're wearing trousers, or you're wearing a coat or anything over it, it doesn't matter. Even if it's thin, like shorts, for example, that doesn't invalidate the wudu. Okay. وعن عائشة رضي الله عنها أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: من أصابه قي أو رعاف أو قلس أو مذي فلينصرف فليتوضأ ثم ليبني على صلاته وهو في ذلك لا يتكلم. أخرجه ابن ماجه وضعفه أحمد وغيره. Here the Prophet ﷺ says, lists a number of things that invalidate the wudu. Whoever vomits, or bleeds through the nose, or releases madhi, should go away, perform ablution, then complete his salah, on the condition that he doesn't speak in the process. How does this work? A person is praying in the salah, and blood comes from their nose. They go, wash their nose, repeat their wudu, then return and continue where they left off from. You don't even need to start again, based on this hadith. And this is the opinion of Malik ibn Anas rahimahullah, that you can do that. But he says here rahimahullah, وَضَعَّفَهُ أَحْمَدْ. Ahmad considers it ضعيف. He considers the hadith ضعيف. And this is why vomiting and bleeding doesn't invalidate the wudu according to Malik and according to a Shafi'i. Yeah? It doesn't invalidate the wudu. Bleeding doesn't invalidate the wudu. If there's large amounts of bleeding, according to Ahmad, it invalidates. However, according to the majority of companions and tabi'een, bleeding doesn't invalidate the wudu. Bleeding does not invalidate the wudu. Neither does throwing up invalidate the wudu. it requires washing. If you bleed, you need to wash it because it's najis, like we said. However, it doesn't require repeating of wudu. And this hadith is da'if. Okay. As for madhi, do you need to make wudu?
Yeah.
Yes, by consensus, by ijma'. And like we said, the qa'idah is, just because a hadith is weak, does it mean everything in it is weak? No. The rulings can be right. The rulings can be correct. And in fact, the rulings can be a ijma', a consensus, even if the hadith itself is weak. Yeah? And this is important. Some people think, if the hadith is weak, you need to do the opposite of the hadith. No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. Yeah? وعن جابر بن سمرة رضي الله عنه أن رجلا سأل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أتوضأ من لحوم الغنم قال إن شئت. So a man came to the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم and said, should I perform ablution from eating mutton, sheep, the meat of sheep? قال إن شئت, if you want. قال أفنتوضأ من لحوم الإبل قال نعم. Should I make wudu after eating camel meat? He said yes. He said yes. أخرجه مسلم. Who's eating camel meat here? Yeah? It's good meat?
Yeah, really nice.
Yeah? It's not that, is it common here in the country? They sell it in the UK?
Yeah.
No, I've never seen it being
They
sold.
do sell it,
They
but
do?
it's rare.
Anyways, here, this hadith is Sahih Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ is asked, should you eat from, should you make wudu after eating mutton, camel, the meat of sheep? He said, if you want to make wudu. As for camel meat, he said, yes, make wudu. And this is the opinion of, even though the hadith is Sahih Muslim, it's the opinion of Ahmad ibn Hanbal only. The opinion of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. The three Imams, Ahmad, Malik and Shafi'i and Abu Hanifa, say, you don't require wudu. Why? Because they say this hadith is mansukh, abrogated. Abrogated with the hadith of Jabir radiallahu anhu. And Jabir radiallahu anhu says, the author doesn't mention it here, but it's an authentic hadith in which Jabir radiallahu anhu says, كان آخر الأمرين من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ترك الوضوء مما مسته النار. The last of the two matters with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was leaving wudu from things that have been cooked. Food touched with fire, meaning cooked. Yeah? Because initially, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam obligated wudu from cooked food. If you ate cooked food, whether sheep or beef or camel meat or anything, touched with fire, and you ate that, you're required to make wudu. And so, Jabir says the final matter was leaving wudu. Meaning you used to require wudu and now wudu is no longer required. But Ahmad ibn Hanbal says, that's generally speaking, not requiring wudu. But this is a specific case. Because if you say this was before when it was obligatory, then why did he say to the sheep meat, if you want? Okay? Why did he say if you want? If you're saying this hadith came before it was abrogated, then the Prophet ﷺ would have said, yes, make wudu for both. Because both are cooked meat. But he said, no, for the first one if you want. And the second one he said, yes, make wudu. He said, make wudu. So there's a clear distinction, difference. So you can't use this hadith to abrogate that one. Okay, you can't use this one to abrogate that one. This one came after the abrogation of the touching fire food. Yeah? And this is why some of the scholars of hadith, like Imam al-Nawawi and al-Bayhaqi, and who else held this view? Ibn al-Mundhir, Ibn Khuzaymah, Ibn Abd al-Barr. These are Shafi'i scholars. And Ibn Abd al-Barr is a Maliki. They chose the opinion that camel meat invalidates the wudu. Even though the madhab of their imam is that it doesn't invalidate the wudu. And this shows that someone who has an understanding of the Sunnah, an understanding of the texts of the Quran and the opinions of the scholars, needs to go with the opinion that they think is the Sunnah, whether it's the opinion of their madhab or the opinion of not their madhab. And this is important, because now we're in a time of always, as always, with everything, we have extremes. We have the one who wants to say, leave all the four madhab, don't go near them, they know nothing. And on the other hand, we have the one who wants to say, you have to stick to the view of your madhab regardless of what. Even if an angel came and told you no, it's no. If it's in the books of the madhab, then we have to follow it. Yeah, and that's of course extreme as well. That's extreme as well. No one did this in the world before. Only afterwards did this come about. Okay, extreme firmness. And these madhab are very important to learn fiqh, to study fiqh and understand. Because when a person goes from here to here, from here to here, you'll become confused. And you can see when we mention 3, 4, 5 opinions, become confusing. So studying a madhab is very important. And that's the way of all the salaf. They study one madhab. Then after that, they start to study elsewhere. And learn other madhab. Then if they see a view in a madhab here is better, then they follow that. Okay, if they think this is stronger here in this madhab, they follow it. If it's in here, they follow that. No problem. But after you've studied, a person can't do that from the beginning. Not from the beginning. The moment you sit down studying, you start to choose, this is stronger, this is stronger. Who told you it's stronger? Huh? Yani alim says it's stronger, but this is important. If an alim says this is the sahih, this is the correct view, what does that mean? If an alim says these are 3 opinions, and the correct opinion is the first one.
We take the first one.
But what does it mean when he says the correct opinion? Did he have...
He knows better than anyone else.
No, but what does it mean when he says this is the correct opinion? Does it mean, based on my understanding, this is stronger? Or does it mean, I have had a revelation from Allah who told me this is stronger?
In his point of view, that's...
In his view, it's stronger. In his view, it's stronger. And this is why, if you were to ask one scholar, this issue of invalidating with the private parts, for example, ask Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen, he says the strong opinion, the correct opinion, is that it doesn't invalidate wudu unless with shahwa. Ask someone else from today's scholars like Shaykh Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad, or Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, or Shaykh Muhammad al-Hassan al-Shanqiti. They'll say the correct opinion is it invalidates wudu always. And this hadith is weak. Do we understand? One scholar says this is the correct opinion. One scholar says this is the correct opinion. They're not saying, I have had revelation and I am sure this is correct. They're not saying that. They're saying, I have done my research, I have my understanding, I have looked into this matter, and based on my understanding, this is the correct opinion. Okay, so it means that when a person hears the correct opinion, they shouldn't think the correct opinion with Allah. Not necessarily. Yeah? Because if 3, 4, 5 people, different people say this is the correct opinion, which one is it? This one for him, this one for him, this one for him, this one for him. Yeah, this is very important. For you, we as a follower, someone as a follower, listens, for example, to a fatwa from a shaykh. He says, this is the correct opinion. So he goes to another person and says, what are you doing? This is not the correct opinion. This is the correct opinion. Why? Because he heard someone say this is the correct opinion. Not realizing that that's the correct opinion according to him only. Maybe this person heard another shaykh who said this is the correct opinion. And so he's following that. Okay, is that clear? People misunderstand the correct opinion. It does not mean with Allah. How do you know with Allah is the correct opinion? How? How do we know? And if someone says because it's stronger in evidence, both will have evidence. Both will sometimes have very strong evidence. Now I explained to you 3 opinions on touching the private parts. All of them are very strong. All the opinions are strong. Yeah? All the opinions are very strong, and all of them have strong usul, and all of them have hadith to defend their opinions. And so it's not a case of one has proof, one has no proof. They have proof. And as a follower, you choose the imam that you think is most knowledgeable and most pious, and you follow them. Because if you, from the beginning, want to do research and find, you'll get lost. You'll get lost. Try it if you want. Try with every mas'ala, every single hadith, try and do your own research and find what's the strong opinion. You'll be here until Yawm al-Qiyamah. You'll be here until Yawm al-Qiyamah. And this is why a person needs to choose an imam they trust, whether from the former madhahib, or whether from a contemporary imam, or any scholar they trust and they believe his knowledge is strong and sound and they're pious and known for their knowledge. Follow that person's view. Follow that person's view. After a while, if you start to understand how the scholars deal with the hadith, how scholars deal with the Quran, how scholars deal with evidence, then if you want to choose based on what seems strong, that's up to you. That's up to you. That's not a problem. Okay, after a while, once you've got used to things a bit, a person can say, okay, this is the evidence of this imam, this is some of the evidence of this imam, I think I'm going to follow this one, inshallah. It seems stronger in hadith. It seems stronger in proof. It's the majority opinion, so I'll follow this. No problem. Okay, but again, don't think that because you're following that opinion, it's the sahih with Allah. Because if you do more research, you'll find actually, now I'm going to follow this one. And if you do more research on their proof, you'll say actually I'm going to follow this one. And these scholars have huge volumes of proofs of their opinions. We only see the opinions themselves. A book, for example, would mention mas'ala, hadith, proof. This is the opinion, this is the proof. This is the opinion, this is the proof. One proof only. Books will mention one proof usually, or 3 or 4 proofs only. They won't mention the proofs of the other side, and how we respond, and how they respond back, and how we respond back, and how they respond back, and how we respond back. You don't find that in all the books. So someone reads a book, for example, and then sees the proof and thinks, okay, this is proof, everyone else has no proof then. If this has proof, then no one else can have proof as well, which is a mistake. Okay, mistake. Now, for example, we read a book in Hanbali fiqh, and it says it's wajib to make wudu from eating camel meat because of this hadith. You read a Hanafi book, it will say wudu is not required because this hadith is abrogated. If you read the Hanafi book, you're going to think, oh, the Hanafi view is stronger. Hanafi view is stronger because the hadith is abrogated, so they're mistaken because it's abrogated. If you read the Hanbali book, you'll say this is stronger. Do we understand? So for a person to truly have a choice on an opinion, you have to read a lot and study a lot and research a lot. What's their proofs? How did they respond to this? Why did they not use this hadith? Why did they not use this hadith? What about this verse? What about their proof? What about their response? Etc. It takes a long time. This is why a person follows the person they trust. Follows the person they trust, whoever that is. And afterwards, if a person wants to choose opinions, then no problem. And this is the sunnah of all the scholars. They start off with following one madhab and learn that madhab properly. Then after that, they choose. Now, for example, let's take Shaykh Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, who's become an imam in our time and an authority in many rulings. A person sees Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he says the madhab of Ahmad is stronger here, and the madhab of Malik is stronger here, the madhab of Abu Hanifa is stronger here. So he thinks he can do the same as well, he should do the same. But no, Ibn Taymiyyah did this after he became a Shaykh in fiqh, an imam in fiqh. We've just started. When we follow his footsteps, his study, then we can follow his, afterwards we can be like him in choosing views. And this is really important. Correct opinion means, correct opinion according to the Shaykh. If you trust the Shaykh, and he says correct opinion, say Alhamdulillah, I'm going to follow this. I'm going to follow this now. Yeah? Especially scholars who you trust and you know are strong with their proof, follow that scholar. Follow them. If he says, this view is the sahih, this view is the correct opinion, or you see this is the view is the majority view, follow. Alhamdulillah. Follow. Afterwards, if you want to do extra research, find the proofs of this side and that's up to you, and then you can decide whether you want to choose this view or that view. But in the beginning, it has to be following a Shaykh, an Imam, someone who you trust. Okay. Is anything not clear on this, even though, yeah?
About the camel meat, is there any specific reason behind it?
La, they say this ruling is ta'abbudi, meaning it's purely worship, we don't know the reason behind it. We don't know the reasoning behind it. Because camel meat is stronger, because camel meat is this, tastes like this, Allahu A'lam. There's no specific reasoning. The scholars specifically say this. هذا حكم تعبدي, which means the ruling is followed without fully understanding the reasoning. We don't fully know the reasoning behind it. We follow it because it's in the hadith, that's it. And it's just camel meat. Camel milk doesn't invalidate wudu. Or any other part of the body from inside doesn't invalidate. Just camel meat, because that's what came in the hadith. And there's no specific any wisdom or reasoning that if you find it elsewhere, you also need to make wudu. La, this is camel meat only. No other meat requires wudu. Even if a person was to eat pig meat, even though it's haram, if a person was to eat the meat of a pig, they still wouldn't need to make wudu. They wouldn't need to make wudu. Okay? It's not to do with camel meat is it strong or heavy or something like that. It's just to do with this came in the hadith, and that's why it requires wudu. Okay. Okay, we'll move on to mention these two hadith and we'll end it there. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من غسل ميتا فليغتسل ومن حمله فليتوضأ. Whoever washes a dead person should take a bath, and whoever carries a dead person should make wudu. قال أحمد رحمه الله لا يصح شيء في هذا الباب. Nothing in this chapter is authentic, which means this hadith is not authentic, and therefore the ruling doesn't apply. And the ruling doesn't apply according to the majority of scholars. Touching a dead person doesn't require wudu or ghusl. Washing a dead person doesn't require ghusl, and doesn't require wudu according to most scholars either. وعن عبد الله بن أبي بكر رضي الله عنهما أن في الكتاب الذي كتبه رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لعمرو بن حزم أن لا يمس القرآن إلا طاهر. رواه مالك ووصله النسائي وابن حبان وهو معلول. لا يعرف مخالف من الصحابة. Okay. The book written by the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم to Amr ibn Hazm contained none except a pure person should touch the Quran. None except a pure person should touch the Quran. Okay. This hadith is the opinion of the vast majority of scholars. The vast majority. In fact, Shaikh Sa'd al-Shithri here, I've taken note, says لا يعرف مخالف من الصحابة. No one from the companions disagreed on this. That touching a mishaf requires wudu. Touching a mishaf requires wudu. Okay? And this hadith is sahih. It's authentic. And this hadith is relied upon from the imams of the past all the way down to our time. They use this hadith as a proof to say that touching the mishaf requires wudu. And it's the opinion of the four imams and the companions and tabi'een and almost all of the scholars. Small disputes from Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi and other scholars who say it doesn't invalidate, because they say tahir in this hadith means Muslim. They say tahir, no one except the tahir should touch the Quran. They say tahir means Muslim. Okay, that's not, and according to most scholars, that's not enough. Tahir means Muslim. They say tahir here means wudu, someone with wudu, purity. Otherwise, if it means none should touch the Quran except a tahir, that requires a specific reason, because tahir generally means pure with purification. If you're going to change the meaning of tahir, you need some proof to say why we're going to change the meaning. Okay? If I say, for example, bring the glass, and I mean by glass, plate. I need to explain that I mean plate. I don't use a word that means something and then expect the person to understand me like that. Yeah? So if I use the word tahir, it means tahir. If you want to change the meaning of tahir, you need to say why. Why are you changing the meaning of tahir? Okay. Anyways, this is the view of the majority. Mishaf requires wudu. Mishaf is a book like these which contain Quran only. Okay, which contain Quran only. Not any book which contains some ayat. That doesn't require wudu. Even a book of tafsir doesn't require wudu. And tafsir al-Jalalain concise, very concise book of tafsir. One of the scholars, I think of Yemen, said, I counted the words of the Quran and I counted the words of the tafsir. And I found that the words of the tafsir are more than the words of the Quran, and therefore I knew that I could touch this book without wudu. He went through all that effort just so they can touch the book of tafsir without wudu. And not just because of that, but to come to the ruling, to come to the answer, whether this is a book of tafsir or a book of Quran. Okay, a book of mishaf, or whether it's a tafsir. If the tafsir contains more words, then it's a tafsir and you can touch it without wudu. This is in terms of permissibility, of course. Otherwise, some masahif contain words on the side. That's still a mishaf, because it's only a few words. It's still a mishaf. It's not a tafsir, because only a couple of words are translated or explained. Also, the books that are translations from Arabic to English, they don't require wudu. Okay, because they're not masahif. Also, reciting from your phone doesn't require wudu. You can recite and you can flick the page without wudu. Okay? Because it's nothing to do with your finger. Your finger's not dirty. It's to do with wudu, and it's to do with respecting the mishaf. This is not a mishaf. Yes, the Quran is there. You can see it, but it's not a mishaf. Okay? And the touching is touching the mishaf itself. That's the point. It's not about touching the verse. It's about touching the mishaf. Respect for touching the mishaf. Otherwise your hand is clean. Okay. Yes. Okay, so that's inshallah clear. How long do we have left until
Half an hour.
Half an hour? It's 1:45. Okay.
Not 15 minutes.
15 minutes. 8:30.
8:30.
Aisha has 8:30. Okay. We can do a couple of ahadith from the final chapter of the book, and then we'll end it there, inshallah. Okay, so we reached the hadith of, we covered the ahadith of good manners, and remember last lesson we took the hadith of shortening the thawb, and we took the hadith of eating and drinking with the right hand. And today we move on to chapter 2 in this book, Babul Birri was Sila, kindness and joining the ties of relationships. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من أحب أن يبسط له في رزقه وأن ينسأ له في أثره فليصل رحمه أخرجه البخاري. If any of you wishes to have his provisions expanded, provision means wealth, expanded, increased, and his term of life prolonged, your life prolonged, treat your relatives well. Treat your relatives well. This hadith is Sahih al-Bukhari. And what does he mean here? Some scholars say it means literally your life is extended. So for example, Allah has decreed this person will treat his family members well, and therefore his life is prolonged. And other scholars say no, this person's life is blessed with barakah. Allah puts barakah in this person's life. Because we can live 50 years, you can live 50 years, and I can live 50 years. But you can do so many things with that 50 years, like a Shafi'i who died at the age of 56. And you can do nothing with your 50 years. So living 50 years is not what's important. What's important is how you use it. So this hadith, they say, means Allah blesses that person's time, puts barakah in their life and their time, so that they make use of it and increase in reward during the lifetime. وعن جبير ibn مطعم رضي الله عنه. Now, of course, there's another point in this hadith here. A person here who treats his relatives well, only for this reason, for the reason of increasing in wealth, for example. No other reason except for increasing in wealth. If a person wanted that increase in wealth, and increase in life, and the reward in the akhirah, then alhamdulillah, you're rewarded. But if their intention is only increase in wealth, then they might be given that, and that's it. Because to be rewarded in the akhirah, you need to have intention to be rewarded. When you're acting, you need the intention to act. However, if a person says, I want to have my wealth and life prolonged because I want to act upon this hadith, then that's pure intention. That's a sound intention which you're rewarded for. Okay? وعن جبير بن مطعم رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يدخل الجنة قاطع. سبحان الله. قاطع يعني قاطع رحم. The one who cuts the ties of relationships will not enter Jannah. متفق عليه. Meaning al-Bukhari and Muslim. The one who cuts the ties of relationships, meaning has family members but cuts the ties. Families don't talk. Families ignore each other. Family members, they will turn their backs away from each other. Walk past each other, won't give salam. Okay, will never visit each other, won't communicate with each other, won't want anything to do with each other. This is a big problem. The Prophet ﷺ says, لا يدخل الجنة. They won't enter Jannah. It's something very important. A person, especially with big families, especially with large families, those who have large families, some of us here are only here with maybe your parents or your wife and children only. But many communities, especially those who have been here for a long time, like the Asian community, and the Somali community, and the Yemeni community, they have parents, and grandparents, and grand-grandparents, and cousins from here, cousins there, large families. So disputes often happen. Disputes happen between these family members. And so there's hatred between the families, and disputes, and arguments. And they won't give salam to each other. And it's a big problem. It's a big problem. And this is a dangerous thing. A person needs to remember, whatever you're fighting about, it can never equal one hasana in the akhirah. Whatever you're fighting about, even if it's £1 billion of a business, even if it's £1 billion, whatever you're fighting about, it's not worth one hasana in the akhirah. Let them insult you, let them curse you, let them say what they want to say. You do your duty, and they're holding to account is with Allah. Okay, they have cursed you. They have accused your families of this. They have said you do this. They have said you're this and you do this. And so on. Let them say what they say. Try to solve problems. Try to end disputes and agreements. If nothing happens, don't cut ties of relationships. Do what you wish. Do at least the bare minimum. Give salam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Ask how things are. And the scholars say giving salam is a bare minimum. A bare minimum. If you're not giving salam at least to your relatives, then this is cutting ties of relationships. Walking past each other and ignoring each other completely. Okay, you don't have to hug and kiss and give presents and invite them every day to your house and so on, if there's a big dispute. But at least give salam. Don't say anything harmful. Be reasonable. At times visit, ask if things are well, etc. That's it. It's not difficult. It's not difficult. The person does this has to overcome any sort of hatred or friction. Friction in this dunya is easy. It's light. It can never be that important. And that's why Aisha radiallahu anha says the Prophet ﷺ never got angry for himself. Whereas lots of these family disputes are disputes about the dunya. Are they disputing because of the akhirah? Families that we see, if they're arguing, disputing, are they disputing because of matters of the akhirah? Someone has committed an issue that's relating to the akhirah? No, of course not. It's matters of the dunya. Issues through the dunya. It's to do with wealth, it's to do with marriage, it's to do with this, it's to do with that. Easy things. Things that are light, not worthy of attention. Yeah, so if a person makes a mistake of cutting ties with you, let them. They'll be held to account, not you. You still give the salam, you still ask if things are fine, you still visit. And the more you do this, there is no way they're going to continue in their same ways. They have to at least soften up a bit. They have to. Any human being, so long as they're human, they're going to soften up a little. And if they don't soften up, then you've done your job, and you can say to Allah on the Day of Judgment, I've done what I can, that's all I can do. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Yeah.
Even the relatives don't follow the right path.
Even the relative that doesn't follow the right path, still they need to be looked after. Your parents, if they're non-Muslims, you still have to look after them. Relatives that are non-Muslims still have to be respected, etc. If a person sees a benefit, this needs to be understood. If you see a benefit in ignoring them, this is one thing, this is different. You know, for example, this cousin of mine, if I'm harsh with them, and I don't talk to them and ignore them, they're going to start thinking about their ways. They might change themselves. Then fine, no problem, this is something. If, however, you being harsh to them makes them hate you more and turn away from the path even more, what's the point in doing that? Yeah, this is a big misunderstanding. Someone says someone is a person of fisq, sin, or a person of bid'ah, then we have to turn away from them. If you turn away from them and they become even harder on their sin, or even harder on their views that are misguided, you've made things worse. You've made things worse. For yes, even a person who's sinful, even a person who's not on the right path, even a person who has beliefs that are off this planet, still they need to be looked after and respected and so on. And that's going to bring them closer usually. Bring them closer to you and help guide them, inshaAllah. If, however, you know yourself, this relative of mine, I know that if I'm firm and harsh with them, they're going to change for the better, alhamdulillah, no problem. No problem. Okay. We'll leave it to that. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi.